Hello, I'm Father Robert Lauder, priest of the Diocese of Brooklyn, professor of philosophy at St. John's University. This is part of our continuing series on the Catholic novel. Today we're doing Graham Greene's The End of the Affair. Now let me say right away, this is my favorite Catholic novel. My own opinion is Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory is probably a better novel. I think The Power and the Glory is Graham Greene's masterpiece, but this is the novel I like best. Not only of Graham Greene's work, not only of Catholic novels, but of any novel. I read it first when I was in college. Now, I remember I went to my spiritual director, my confessor, and said, is it okay if I read Graham Greene's The End of the Affair? Because I had heard it was an extremely sexual novel. Now, there are a lot of sexual symbols in it, but in terms of being suggestive, compared to what's being written today, this is a pretty mild novel. Like, I would not hesitate to have seniors in high school to read this novel. The epilogue is this: man has places in his heart which do not yet exist, and suffering enters them so that they may have existence. And that's from the Catholic radical Leon Bloy, B-L-O-Y, who was the godfather of Jacques Henri Samaritan. And I think that little quote catches the whole novel. So you know what I'm going to do? I think the first two paragraphs of the novel are really tops. They grab you right away. And so I'm going to read them, and then I'm going to comment on them. So it begins. Ready? A story has no beginning or end. Arbitrarily, one chooses that moment of experience from which to look back or from which to look ahead. I say one chooses with the inaccurate pride of a professional writer who, when he has been seriously noted at all, has been praised for his technical ability. But do I, in fact, of my own will, choose that black, wet January night on the Common in 1946, the sight of Henry Miles slanting across the wide river of rain, or did those images choose me? It is convenient, it is correct, according to the rules of my craft, to begin just there. But if I had believed then in a God, I could also have believed in a hand plucking at my elbow, suggesting, speak to him. He hasn't seen you yet. For why should I have spoken to him? If hate is not too large a term to use in relation to any human being, I hated Henry. I hated his wife, Sarah, too. And I suppose he surely at times must have hated his wife and that other, in whom in those days we were lucky enough not to believe. So this is a record of hate far more than of love. And if I say anything good about Henry or Sarah, I can be trusted. I am writing against the bias because it is my professional pride to prefer the near truth even to the expression of near hate. I think that's a great opening. Now, what have we learned in that opening? The one who is telling us the story is a novelist. He's not considered a great novelist. Sometimes he's been praised for his technical ability. In this opening scene, he did not believe in God. He, at least implicitly, suggests that eventually he did believe in God. And he also suggested maybe Henry Miles and his wife Sarah, they didn't believe in God, but they ultimately came to believe in God. So the end of the affair, I think it's got at least two meanings, at least two. Early on in the story of these three people, the writer, whose name is Maurice Bendrix, has an affair with Sarah, who is married to Henry. Sarah Miles is married to Henry Miles. So he has an affair with her. And they're very much in love, but she feels she can't leave Henry. They've been married a long time and so on, but there's very little passion left in their relationship. Maurice and Sarah plan a weekend together, but it's during the Second World War, and the Germans are bombing London. Maurice leaves the bedroom where they've been making love. He's going to go downstairs to see if any damage has been done. And when he goes down, a bomb hits the hotel they're in. Sarah goes down and sees him lying under debris, and she is certain that he's dead. She goes back upstairs, and she kneels down and says, oh, dear God, let him live. Let him live. I know I've been terrible. I know I've been a sinner, but let him live. If you let him live, I'll do anything. If you let him live, I'll give him up. She turns, and into the room walks Maurice Bendrix. Now, question, was he really dead? Is this really a miracle? Or is, in God's providence, was he never dead, but she came to think he was dead, and it's going to have the same effect on her? So she feels she has to keep this vow, though she's not even sure she believes in God. But she feels bound by it. And so she breaks off with Morris Benders, and he doesn't know why. So he thinks she's taken a new lover, and of course she has, but it's not a human being. It's God. And then Green does something I think is so clever. Morris hires a detective to follow her, to find out. And Henry is suspicious that she's having an affair with somebody, but it's not that at all. What's happening is she's going to see a priest for instructions, and she's also often visiting Catholic churches. So the detective, who's really a kind of comedy relief, is able to steal Sarah's diary. And he thinks this is going to be wonderful because this will prove that she's having an adulterous affair, and that will very much please Morris Benders. He'll know the truth. So Morris starts reading the diary, and there's a great deal of love talk in it. Morris and the reader perhaps also. I've read this book so many times. I'm not sure what I thought the first time. I think the reader too suspects that she's talking about some human lover, but she isn't. She's talking about a love affair she's having with God. And here's the genius of Graham Greene. That diary really sounds like it was written by a female. I mean, don't ask me how Graham Greene did this. I don't know, but it's, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of a female Confessions of St. Augustine. I mean, that's how much that's how moving I find this and how powerful I find it. When I first read this in college, I had the feeling at times truths about God were leaping off the page at me. And that's why I'm so excited about this series. As I've told many people, I still think that the Catholic novel is a treasure that Catholics don't realize, many Catholics don't realize is available. And though we don't ordinarily talk about novels being spiritual reading, in my own life, they have been some of the best spiritual reading I've ever done. So as the novel develops, Sarah becomes more and more in love with God. When Morris finds out what this is all about, he goes to her and he says, let's forget the past. I was wrong. How can you love someone you can't see? Come away with me. Leave your husband and come away with me. And just to quiet Morris, she says she'll do that. Now I don't want to spoil the end of the novel, so I won't. But let me say this. Why do I like this novel, even though I admit it's not as good a novel as Power and the Glory? The reason I like it is the intensity with which Greene is able to write about Sarah's discovery of God. I mean, I think one way of getting at Graham Greene is his writing, understanding his theological paradox. By that I mean this. The apparent sinner turns out to be the saint. And the apparent devout Catholic, now that's not in this novel, but in other novels, the apparently devout Catholic turns out to be a rather narrow, self-centered human being. So I think theological paradox is a good way of approaching Greene. And at one point in the novel, Morris feels that God is after him. And he begins to suspect that Sarah is a saint. And he said, I don't have the page here, but he says, if Sarah, who was really promiscuous, could become a saint, then maybe all of us are being called to be saints. And that's just one example of what I think is just terrific writing, okay? So the journey of one of the characters in this novel is this. From unbelief, disbelief in God, to belief in God, but hatred of God because of what God is demanding, to finally praying to God. And the prayer, once again, is paradoxical. What's the prayer? Dear God, leave me alone. I'm too old to love. I'm too old to learn to love. Now, we know that God is not going to answer that prayer the way the prayer wants it to be answered, okay? Once again, it's the hound of heaven pursuing sinners. And this hound of heaven is unlimited love and drawing people closer and closer to himself. At one point, when Morris finds out that Sarah is in love with God, he says, that's not our kind of love. And Sarah says, maybe there is only one kind of love. And then she says to him, don't be upset. People live their whole lives without seeing God. So she thinks maybe she can do this. I'm not going to tell the end of the novel, but it was made at film twice. Once, Van Johnson played Morris Bendrix, and Deborah Carr played Sarah. And John Mills did a terrific job as the private detective. It was just terrific. And then it was made years later with Ralph Fiennes playing Morris and Julianne Moore playing Sarah. I think that Van Johnson, who was a very popular actor, was really miscast. They changed it. He wasn't a British novelist in the movie, but still. But I will say this. It's probably the best acting that Van Johnson ever did. Now, Ralph Fiennes is terrific, but I wouldn't recommend the second movie. I really think they went overboard in the sex scenes. It seems to me they're much more explicit than they would have to have been. So I'm recommending the earlier film. But before either film, I'm recommending this novel. I've recommended it to many, many people, and of course I teach it at St. John's University. Nobody, and I mean nobody, in the last 40 years has said to me, you know, I really don't like that novel. I didn't find it exciting. No, people find it tremendously exciting and tremendously inspiring. Now, what are the two meanings of the title, The End of the Affair? The first meaning is, once she thinks this is a real miracle that Morris is brought back to life, she terminates the affair. The other meaning is this: end as a telos, end as a goal. So the affair, this adulterous affair ultimately leads to love of God. So the suggestion, the hint that Green is making, of course, is love anything, and you're on your way toward God. I think C.S. Lewis says that in Four Loves. Love anything, and you are taking a tremendous risk, because God is going to sneak in and invite you into a lifelong commitment and a lifelong relationship. So I find the book filled with great, great passages. I don't want to read any of them to you. I'll leave that to you. And I find it a tremendous antidote to the contemporary sexual revolution. I think this novel sees sex in a really deep, profound way, ultimately a very Catholic way. I guarantee you, you will love it.